Hello, and welcome to this interview with a very special guest of Cary Wright, VP of Product Management for Endace. Cary, welcome. Today, I want to get in and talk about Zero Trust. It's really the hot topic in the security industry right now. So, kind of want to start off with, Cary, getting your thoughts. We hear about the 7 tenets of the NIST Zero Trust model. What does all that really mean? And can you simplify it down for us?
Yeah. So the seven tenets, you can really simplify it to six really key things that you need to be aware of with your networks and with Zero Trust. The first thing is every user on the network has to be assumed to be hostile. So the whole idea of Zero Trust is you assume that threats always exist on the network at all times, regardless of where they come from. So network locality is not sufficient for deciding trust, and every user, every device, and every network flow is untrusted until it's authenticated and authorized. Right, so we've got that, never trust, always verify type policy there, and then Zero Trust also requires us to be dynamic in the way we're managing our policies, our environments. And it's got to be calculated as broadly as possible. So we need to be looking at all the telemetry and then adjusting the policy of our security in our networks and our environments based on what we're learning, what we're monitoring, and what we're seeing. And lastly, Zero Trust requires us to really strictly monitor our networks. Assuming that there's threats always on there, we should be monitoring and trying to capture and remediate and respond to those threats. So, at a very high level, it's never trust and always verify and continuously monitor your network because it's never perfect.
No, that's excellent insights, Cary. When you drill down into it, right, there's the next layer of details is the capability model, and there's a number of pillars and core capabilities about the architecture and the infrastructure and the processes and the people. Can you talk to us about these different pillars and capabilities and how network packet data can help in investigations?
Yeah. It's quite a comprehensive document, isn't it? The NIST standard on Zero Trust, and it's been developing over many years. So while it's a hot topic today, it's actually not new. It's been developing for quite a while, and the core pillars. There's 7 core pillars. There's core capabilities under each of the pillars. And it's important to apply the Zero Trust principles across the board. And one of the principles is you need to monitor and record your network. You need to continuously monitor and try and detect and remediate any issues and threats. And when you do a mapping of how packet capture and network monitoring applies to Zero Trust, it's almost to the whole matrix of core capabilities versus the pillars. For example, data loss prevention. Network recording is really critical for triaging data loss issues. If there's been data exfiltration, you want to be able to look at exactly how did they get in, what did they take, where did it go, and having a record of that is critical. Software supply chain, another area right in the center of that matrix that you probably see on the screen right now. Software supply chain is such a complicated area. We have threats appearing in the software supply chain that we need to be able to investigate and remediate, and we may not know what they are until after they've been executed as a vulnerability. So yeah, there's a lot to the capability model, but having network monitoring and continuous packet capture is a critical piece of supporting that trust model.
No, that makes perfect sense. But taking it a step further, as we know, right, most organizations are monitoring and have visibility already. So what are they missing? What are they missing in their monitoring systems and their processes? And how can we help SOC teams?
Yeah, so we see a variety of teams out in the industry there, and some are doing really well with their network monitoring. They're putting in place continuous packet capture in key parts of their network. They're able to look back days or weeks to really investigate things. And then we see other organizations which have huge gaps. So, they've not invested enough in that aspect, and typically those organizations are scrambling. They're struggling to investigate efficiently. They're struggling to keep up with all of the threats entering their network, and that's starting off on the back foot is going to make it very difficult as you transition to a full zero trust model. Because you don't have that feedback loop. You don't have the ability to go in and say, yeah, that's a threat. Oh, that one there, no, that's just a new service that was turned up by one of our teams, and that's not an issue. So having the ability to get to that decision point or that understanding very quickly requires you to have the right monitoring in place. And I think that's one of the key things that's missing in some teams with zero trust deployment.
No, that's great insights. So, Cary, when I hear about zero trust, I often hear folks jump to the concept of network segmentation, or otherwise known as walled gardens. Can you explain that a little bit to our listeners, number one, and then what does this solve? But what challenges does it also then create?
Yeah. The walled gardens approach is a really key part of zero trust, and it's interesting because it kind of if you assume that there are threats always on the network, and you're probably assuming also that some of those threats are successful, then you want to limit the lateral movement of those threats. So what that means is really minimizing the ability for that threat to move from one part of your organization to another. So segmentation, microsegmentation, firewalling off different regions of your organization is all critical, and it helps you contain the threat. So when things do go wrong, the threat cannot spread too far through your organization. If one of your teams gets hit with ransomware, you'd rather it just contain within that small team rather than have the threat of spreading all throughout your infrastructure. And so dividing it down into small segments is critical. What that also means is it provides a little bit more of a challenge from a monitoring perspective, because now you need to monitor within each of those segments or microsegments. If you don't monitor within the segment or microsegment, the segmentation doesn't actually add as much value, because that becomes a severe infection zone if it gets attacked, and that gives a higher chance that that threat will actually go beyond the walls of that segment. So what that means is you need to critically monitor. You need to record everything that's going on within each segment, at least traffic coming in and out of that segment, and you need to be able to go back and investigate anything happening or any threats that are actually alerted from within that segment. So, essentially assuming that the trust boundaries are not perfect barriers to preventing the attack. So, really interesting aspect to zero trust.
Yeah, no, it's a great way you explained it there, because I think people assume too much in just the segmentation alone, and you highlighted the criticality of the monitoring around it. So you've mentioned network recording a number of times. So can you give some examples of how continuously network recording can really help in a zero trust environment?
It helps in the same way that network recording has traditionally helped our security teams overall. So having the ability to go back and look at a security alert or event and what happened before that event and after that event, is critical in giving you the ability to quickly understand the extent of the threat and how to remediate the threat. If you know that the threat did not fully execute, you may be able to contain it fairly quickly. You might be able to understand if any data was lost, if there is any notification needed to industry or to customers, etc., based on your investigation. And having the packets at hand allows you to quickly get to the bottom of that. The other thing it gives you is the ability to investigate unknown threats in 0 days. So with Zero Trust, there's still vulnerability in the Zero Trust concept, because if your software is compromised, if you've got another SolarWinds type style attack that happens within your infrastructure, that is quite often hard to detect until that 0 day has been, I guess, exposed, acknowledged, understood. None of the security devices are going to be able to detect that very easily. And having the ability to go back and look at the network traffic from, a day ago, a week ago, a month ago, really helps you, remediate and understand if you've been attacked with those new emerging threats.
Now, that 0 day really explains what the shortcoming in triggered capture is, right? So I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Cary, I was on a SANS panel recently, as you know, talking about Zero Trust. And one of the things that came up in that panel discussion was really talking about it being a journey or a process for organizations to evolve their security posture. So what does that mean to you? And, you mentioned a little example there with the 0 day, but why is Zero Trust not a silver bullet for security teams?
Yeah. Well, we don't live in a perfect world. There are areas where Zero Trust will definitely struggle, and it's really around we have legacy applications in place. We have imperfect security in some of our devices, some of our processes, and some of our people, to be honest. People can be one of the biggest vulnerabilities. Misconfiguration, misapplied policies, insider threats, these type of things are all people-related issues. But also we have to run our businesses. We can't just suddenly decide, okay, everything tomorrow is going to be Zero Trust application. We're going to put two-factor authentication across everything and authenticate every connection all the time, because some of our applications are old. Some of our infrastructure is aging. It takes us a while to get to that point. So we have to recognize that we live in an imperfect world. Compromised software, compromised devices or credentials. We could have spoofed servers or services sitting within our networks that we don't see. We've got threats hiding in all those places. And if we assume that, then we need to basically put in place the ability to monitor our networks, to record our networks, and to investigate anything that looks suspicious. And if we do that properly, then it complements Zero Trust and it helps us with that journey. Eventually we'll be less dependent on the monitoring. We'll always need it. But as we start out our journey, it's so important to be able to see what's going on in our networks.
So, Cary, following on that, the answer there you just gave about not being a silver bullet, one of the other points that came up in the panel discussion was really the complexities and the challenges around the wide variety of IoT devices, whether it's medical devices, whether it's thermostats and light switches and things like that, or whether it's PLC pumps and control valves in more energy and types of environments. How do you see the challenges with all of those disparate sets of equipment now potentially on this, network that you've now micro-segmented and trying to manage?
Yeah. That's a really good question, Michael, because those devices have sometimes been in the ground for 10, 15 years. Some of them run pretty basic software. The security controls around those devices or built into those devices are sometimes non-existent. We know there's been a lot of attacks on IoT devices in the past. We know some of those IoT devices are critical components in operational networks, critical infrastructure, potentially, things like buildings, security, even simple things like, HVAC. And then, of course, we've got medical devices spread throughout hospitals, which could be 10, 15, 20 years old in some cases, running software connected to the network, delivering critical patient data. So, they sound like simple devices, but in fact, they're pretty important devices. And micro-segmenting, that's the first step. We need to make sure those devices can't talk to everything else in our enterprise. But monitoring those devices is critical. We need to see, the only way to really see what's going on with those devices is to see everything going in and out of them on the network, and recording that, and being able to go back and investigate it. If there's something haywire going on, something suspicious, we need to see it. So those devices, they're just, they're probably the toughest part of Zero Trust for organizations to deal with, because they're so critical, but yet they're so insecure.
Yep. Well, and huge volumes of them, right? In terms of
huge volumes.
New equipment, right? Everything you mentioned, switches, even cameras, right? Things like that.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent point, Cary. So again, Cary, thank you for taking the time to share with our listeners a little bit more insights and education on Zero Trust and how packet capture can help security organizations improve their security posture with continuous network recording. So thank you, Cary, for taking the time.
Thank you, Michael. Great talking to you.